Hey guys, Phil here at Woods Tree Farm, and today we're gonna make some wood slice ornaments. I got one here, I got one here. They got a little stamp on it. They're cut from tree trunks from last year's unsold trees, and I'm gonna give you a walkthrough of what's involved to prep a tree trunk and cut it and sand it and stamp it and make the little ornaments. Let's get into it. Alright, so the tools that you'll need for this job are probably some things that you already have around your garage, and that's going to include something to cut the branches off of the trunk. We already used some loppers to cut the branches off, but you're going to want to cut even closer to the trunk than maybe the loppers will get. I use a hatchet for that. We're going to use the miter saw. That bird right outside the garage is really loud, isn't it? Oh well, we're going to use the miter saw today, and we're going to use a hand sander, and we're going to use the stamp, and then we're going to use a drill to make a little hole, and that's pretty much it. So you actually don't even need all the power tools. You can do a lot of this by hand. The miter saw makes cutting the slices easier than it would be with a handsaw, but if a handsaw is all you had, you could definitely do it with that. So I've only done a couple dozen of these so far, so I'll share with you what I've learned. I'll share with you a couple of the little tricks in order to get the wood slice straight, and in order to get kind of the best use of the piece of wood that you have. I'll share all my little tiny tricks here with you, and this is all just for the tree farm. This is only April that we're in right now, but we're prepping for this upcoming Christmas season and thinking about what else can we sell when the tree farm is open. So this is one of those things. It's not a lot of out-of-pocket expense for us to do something like this. It just takes a little bit of our time. So we're going to try this out, and we got this idea from another tree farm, actually the tree farm that supplied us with our pre-cut trees that we sold last year. They did something like this, and they had a bunch of really neat designs for their little ornaments. So we're kind of stealing something out of their playbook, going to try it at our farm, see if it can help us make an extra few dollars. And it's also just a nice little handmade thing that people can take away from our farm. They can hang it on their tree, and then they can remember their time at our farm year after year after year when they go and unpack this ornament and put it on their tree. So without any further delay, let me show you what's involved here, and if you got any questions or comments, leave those below, and I'll be happy to answer your questions or whatever. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button to subscribe to our channel so you can get notified of future videos. Alright, so this is just my basic miter saw. You don't need to set an angle on it or anything. I put a little stop block here on my fence, holding the stop block in place with this clamp. And I've already kind of made a few test cuts to figure out how thick I want my little wood slices to be. Some of these are quite thin, and you know, this is probably a little bit of personal preference here, but you can tell that this one's quite a bit thicker than this one. Personally, I like the thinner ones, and then economically I'm gonna get more slices if I make them thinner out of my log, so I'm kind of going for something on the thinner side. Of course, you can only make it that thin if you can get a perfectly vertical cut, and that's hard to do because this piece of wood is not perfectly round, and it doesn't sit perfectly flat on my table. So as I move it around, sometimes my cuts are a little off angle, and that's going to give me a wedge that's going to give me a slice that's not perfectly flat. Here's an example of a slice that I made a little while ago. My piece of wood was getting really out of line, so I went ahead and just took a big wedge off of it in order to get my cut straight and you know, perfectly in line with the blade, so I can get some good flat sections on it. So you might every once in a while have to make a sacrifice cut like that in order to level it out. But the other thing that you can do in order to get this perfectly, well, not perfectly, you're never going to get this perfectly level on here. The other thing you want to do is just cut the branches as flush as you can with the trunk. And the way that I do that is with a hatchet. I'll just show you here. So here's a smaller section. This is actually just a little bit smaller than we want to use. This is about as small as I want, and you can tell this is just a little bit smaller. So, but I'll just demonstrate here. We already cut off all the branches off of this stem with the loppers, but this would be really tough to put on the saw because all of those branches are going to make the angle of that piece of wood difficult to keep to keep consistent. So what I found is that if I can just kind of go along the piece of wood with a little hatchet here and hack off those branches, and I might have to go at it both ways, then I can get it a lot closer to the trunk, and it's going to be a lot easier if I take all these off to keep my piece of wood level on my cutting surface here. So that's what I've done. If you guys have an idea for a better way, just let me know. Alright, another little tip is to go ahead and put on some gloves too, because especially if you're cutting fur like I am. Fur has these resin blisters all around the skin, and when you bust those open, you get that sticky sap everywhere. So as soon as you start cutting into this, I'm going to expose new blisters. You can kind of see, put that way up there, all along here, you see the edge of these blisters here where that sap's just pouring out, and you get that sticky sap everywhere. So, you might want to wear some gloves, or you're going to be completely covered in sap before too long. Alright, so what I want to try to do is get this piece of wood perfectly flush up against with my stop block. Then I know it's going to be perfectly in line with my blade. So I might have to, rotate it a little bit or move it a little bit in order to get it perfectly flush there. And once I'm comfortable that I've got it flush, I can go ahead and make my cut. Alright, and that one looks pretty good. Look it over. Yeah, to me this is a keeper. You can see where it has one little mark here on the edge where I had chopped off a branch, or that's like the edge of where a branch was. But to me, this one looks pretty good. So that's a keeper. I'll put that in the keeper pile. What you'll find as you start to make cuts, some of them will have knots in it and some of them won't, and based on the grain pattern or based on if there's a knot there or not, you can decide whether you want to pitch one of these cuts or keep it. Sometimes you'll get a cut like this and it's got the knot there in the middle of it. You might want a perfectly clean surface there without any knots. Sometimes there'll be a knot on one side and not on the other. So this one was actually in my keeper pile. I just wanted to show you what a knot might look like in case I don't experience one here with my next couple cuts. This one, same one, has all those knots on one side, but the other side's pretty clean. Turn it around like that. Has this one little knot at the top. We'll put that's where our ribbon will go. So that one's a keeper. If I was painting these and I could cover up the knots, maybe I'd feel differently about it, but since we're just doing a stamp and you can still see a lot of the grain, I'm just looking for the cleanest pieces to use. So you can see how it goes. Go right on down the line. And then the next thing you want to do is, these things need to dry out. These are full of sap. They're really moist wood when they're fresh trees. So we're going to set these aside for a few months and let them air dry. This is what we let everything air dry on. All of these were actually cut right after Christmas. So these have been air drying here for a few months in our garage. They're nice and dry, and you want them dry because after they dry out, some of the softer wood shrinks up more than the harder wood. So that's the lighter part of the rings shrinks up more than the darker part of the rings. And you end up with this really rough surface on along the face of the wood piece. So if you want this to be perfectly smooth, you've got to let it dry out completely, and then you've got to sand it down in order to get perfectly smooth. When they first come off the saw, like these, they have almost a nice glassy smooth finish, but if I come back in a couple months after this is dried, it's going to look rough. So that's our next step. After it's dried out, we're going to get a sander, and I've been using just a simple little detail sander like this. Alright, so in order to sand these, what I've been doing is just putting it on a flat surface. I think that actually works better because you can apply more pressure with the sander. I was holding the piece of wood and just rubbing it across the sander with the sander turned on, but I think it works better pushing it down. That's what it looks like. Pretty nice. So compared to these other ones, and you can actually I don't know how well you can tell in the camera here, but you can still see this grain here is recessed a little bit. So we'll see how well this comes in here. But this was the piece that I just sanded, and you can see how part of the grain is sunk in there. That was that softwood that had really shrunk when the wood dried out. So I have to sand off a lot more in order to get this to be a perfectly smooth surface. The other side I worked on a little bit more already, so it's a little bit smoother. But that's how much sanding you're gonna have to do if you want to get it perfectly smooth. Just by comparison, this is what it looked like. This is what it looked like before, and that's what it looks like now that it's sanded. So I'm gonna sand on these others. This one's actually really rough. I don't know how you can tell that on there. So all that needs to come off. Yeah, so this one too, you can see how much that grain really sunk in there, but this side's smoother. So when we stamp it, you know, this one might just end up looking a little bit more rustic because I don't think I'm going to sand away that much material to get this one to be perfectly smooth. Alright, and then the last step here is just to stamp it. At least that's what we're doing. I've seen other people do wood burning, and I've seen people paint these, but we're just using these simple little rubber stamps. I think my wife just got these at a regular craft store, and I've got 2 ink pads here. One's green, one's black. I'm going to use the green one for the tree. These are kind of undersized ink pads, but do something like that. Then I try to figure out how the orientation of this looks best, and maybe which side looks best. This side actually looks a little better. I'm going to put this right on there, right in the middle. And that's it. Looks pretty good. So that's the tree, and then the other one that I have here is the decorative Merry Christmas one. This one, since the branch was up here, I'm going to put that at the top. So as I orient the stamp on here, I'm going to make sure that branch stays up there. For some of these, we could really use a bigger ink pad. You can kind of see this style anyway. You can see right through it and see how much ink is on the design. So now that's ready, just position it right there. Rock it back and forth. And that one looks pretty good. A little bit light on the ink here, but still looks pretty good. And then this last one, I don't know if Merry Christmas will fit. Not really. We'll make this one another tree. There we go. Pretty simple. All right, so that's pretty much it. And the last step was just drilling the little hole on there. I won't show you that. I just used a drill and drilled a hole. Depending on what you're using to put on the ornament, ribbon or twine or yarn or some other kind of string. I actually just used floral wire here for now, but that's not what I'm going to use when I put these up for sale. I just wanted to see what these looked like when they were hanging. I need to get some either decorative, real fine ribbon or some red string or some fine twine or something like that to put through these. So based on whatever I get, I might have to drill my hole a little bit bigger. But you can see how that looks. On this particular one, this is worth pointing out, since this one had the branch there and the little knot line from the branch, we stamped the tree in line with that, and it looks like the trunk of the tree. So depending on your wood pieces and depending on the type of stands that you have, you might be able to get creative and do something like that. So that's pretty much it. If you guys got any questions or comments about these ornaments, leave those in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and share it with your friends. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye.